Hi. So, as our MC announced, my name is Mikkel, and I work at Playdead. I started sometime into Insight's production after Limbo was done, and I did a few things on Insight, but most notably, most focused were visual effects, even though that wasn't what I expected. This is the first time I'm talking solo. I feel a little lonely up here, and I'm going to try to do my best to say as few times as possible, even though that's not going well so far. Anyways, it's a different format from talk I've done before, so I hope you like it. And I have no segues, so waves. When the boy's swimming around in the inside at the water surface level, he generates some waves. This is generally just to give it a little bit of a motion, feel him integrated into the water. And when we first did these, the way we rendered them was to get that bumpy thing that he just did and reflect a cube map. The cube map was a simple go-to thing. It was the hot stuff to do, and it was easy. You know, it blends additively on top, and but it was a bit of a compromise because, you know, where are those lights coming from? And obviously they were coming from the cube map. So there's this source of reflection that doesn't really come from anywhere. They sting in your eye and they just don't really feel like they should be there. And rather than just giving some motion to the water, you've just added a distraction. So that's not nice. It was a compromise, but it was easy. Once renewed, once redone, the shipping version of these waves look more like this. They, rather than sampling this here cube map, and rather than being additive, these guys just blend normally as water would, and they reflect the reflection map that the water is already using, and refract the refraction map that the water, again, is already using. And this seems like a bit of a no-brainer, especially in hindsight, but it was just a good lesson in sort of integration and you know, to fit in or to blend in. That it's important to blend into the picture rather than standing out when in this field is specifically the VFX one. You know, video game VFX are a little bit like the cherry on top or the sprinkle on your donut. If it stands out, just like CGI, visual effects, you would call it out, you would notice it, it's going to bring you out. Most people complain about CGI VFX when they're bad, not when they're there, because if they're just there, you wouldn't notice them. Same could be said for, you know, stage makeup, which I'm not wearing. The best stage makeup would be the one that you didn't even notice, purposefully just went unnoticed. Coming to Inside, I was still in school. I just kind of landed the dream job, and I really wanted to show everybody that I was going to be the very best there ever was. So I wanted to make the biggest explosions and the greatest rain and render tens of thousands of dudes and on Inside. You know, luckily for me and the game, I had great mentorship to, you know, fix that. And the general advice, and in case you've checked the name of this session, the general advice was, how about you turn it down to 90%? And even though it took a long time to get this lesson across the board, it's, I've found some joy in it now, so that's why I'm talking about it. Anyways, the lesson is sort of, in hindsight, obvious, but don't make the rain the brightest thing on screen or the waterfall. Don't color smoke opaquely gray or yellow just because that's smoke color. So let's get into some of that. But first, these waves here. They're all over the game. And in the shipping version, you hopefully don't notice them until I zoom way in and enhance in the details and tell you to look at the freaking waves. If you're playing the game, you're hopefully, you know, just playing the game. You're not looking at your reflection in a pool. You're just going to the right or left in this case, or back and forth, because then it's supposed to be distracting. Again with that white rain. So when we first got rain working, I was really excited about this, so I put it in all of the farmland area and turned it up to 11, and I felt really good about this. Look how many fucking raindrops we can render, Jesus. And, you know, I got some sound advice up front when it came time to tweak this effect, which was something like, turn it down until it becomes uncomfortable. And I did so, and it was, for a while, for a few days it was uncomfortable, but then I took pleasure in the omission of this thing. Now the rain is so dim that, well, the compression of this video is actually making it pretty hard to tell. It just looks like there's a little bit of noise and grain on the video. But you can see it in the shaded side of things or under a lamp post. And that's really all you want. You want to satisfy the eye for when you want to see some rain. And in this case, you shouldn't notice unless you hear the sound of rain and your eyes go looking for the rain. Ah, there it is. And that's all it needs to be. It just needs to be the satisfying amount, not the, you guys, it's fucking raining kind of rain. So this is a tool I like, and maybe it's just because I did a lot of smoke and vapor, or volumetrics, whatever you call them. And the tool was because in the beginning, when I did these things, they were typically additively blended, or opaque gray or yellow, because it's smoke color, right? But they didn't fit in, and they got very quickly, nuked out of the game for good reason. So the revision of this is, as you can see, you can drag in a smokestack with smoke color, and there's a lit color and a shaded color, and you can just use the color picker to pick what's on the lit side of the smoke and what's on the shaded side of that smoke, and it will just kind of blend into the scenery, sort of a, purposefully camouflaging it into the environment, you could see. So this worked. And the way it's done is just, get the dot product between the normal and a light direction. In our case, we're not just using like the sunlight, because there isn't one. And so we're just using a custom light direction, whichever we feel per smokestack feels right. And then, just mixing or lerping between the two colors, and Bob's your uncle. It seems simple, and it is, but it kind of works. And we use these all over, whether they be for exhaust ports or, for impacts or for little ambient stuff in the background. You see it. And even more gameplay stuff that's a little bit more in your face, like this smoke coming out of that jet crate thing. A little bit more on the smoke. I promise I'll be done with it in a second. When we did this, we wanted low overdraw. So we got inspired by Neudog's idea of subparticle motion by introducing some UV distortion in these particles. And we do this by just having a texture that we sample with some motion vectors before we sample the regular texture to sort of distort the texture before we put it on screen. And when we first did this, I was pretty happy about this. I generated some turbulent noise in 3ds Max, which seemed like the right idea. It's like turbulence, right? So we put this in and usually get turned down, not 90%, but 100%. The effect didn't really get anywhere because, well, it's a bad detail, actually. So it needed a rework. And the rework that I got around to was done within Photoshop. And I call this swirl noise, for lack of a better term, because it's, so it's done by taking a UV gradient in Photoshop and kind of applying the swirl filter and then pasting that over a bunch of times. And you get some swirl noise. And this was more pleasant. Now it looks more like whiskey wind, really whiskey motion in the particles. Now it's actually usable, even though we only do 10% of it or so. And that's really all it took for that motion to get right. That particle system probably has like 8 particles or so in total. So not that many layers, but they blend together because of this. A little note on albedo. So in the beginning we had these particle sheets with texture, and I would, because that's what I used to do, right, was have some color in them, like so. So like just have some shaded sides and some lit sides and the texture itself. But it's really kind of a bad interface for putting this in. So actually our particle shader that we use for almost every particle doesn't even accept color from the texture, just because it doesn't need to be there, you could say. So we just accept alpha, and the color is then set by that, light blending thing that I showed before. And this is also important that we use a very low detail alpha, so you don't even notice the disparity between different particles. We get plenty of variation from random rotation and random size of things. We don't need to add more detail than is necessary. We need to cut off somewhere. So, especially with minimalist visuals, this is kind of self-explanatory, but another way to look at it could be that essentially you just don't need to put sprinkles on top of your sprinkles, and this is sprinkles after all. It's not easy for me at least to know what frequency of detail just didn't make anything better, but you know, if you add it, it could become obvious that that final little too explicit detail just takes an effect and either crumbles it or just makes it a little bit off or weird, which is, you know, attention grabbing. So the best way I heard this phrased was from a German fella that I met on the internet. He's been a computer design mentor to a few people, to many actually. And to paraphrase him, he says, his name is Nils Papke, by the way, he says, your work is only as good as its worst detail. So cut it off there because, you know, it'll be graded by its lowest common denominator, you could say. And that's a shame. Another example of that would be that when we first got lens flares working in a nice way that tooled for us right and performed right, the first thing I thought was, we gotta get some rainbows in there in this monochrome game. And for obvious reasons, you know, they got nuked. Even I love rainbows, but they went away. They went monochrome pretty fast. And everyone was happy in the end for this. They look like this now in the game. You wouldn't really notice them as a lens flare, more like a stick layer, or I don't know. Hopefully you don't think about them at all, actually. Back to the water. I promise there's only one more water section. So when we first started with it's not playing at all, is it? Now it is. When we first started with water, or rather got the final water system into the game, the bump map or the normal map that I applied to this water was sort of an oceany one. And just like the turbulence one, I generated it from 3ds Max using cellular noise, just all the octaves in there, and apply normal map filters to said cellular noise to get this sort of ocean bump and all sorts of screen distortion and all sorts of stuff. And of course, the better solution ended up being just, you know, having this little subtle bump on it that, you know, doesn't really drag too much attention, but just satisfies the need for some motion in the water, rather than trying to be like, hey, check me out, I'm an ocean, even though it's a pond. Now, final water bit, and this one, I'll get into some actual technical stuff with it, for those of you that like that, was edge displacement. So, for a long time, when you passed up and down water, it glared in my eyes that the water would be extremely flat, even though it was just for 2 frames. It would blink for a second because it was literally just a flat polygonal surface with nothing on it. And after seeing it, bumpy from above, this was a bit of a dissatisfying thing to see. So we got a tessellated edge with displacement mapping that's close to the camera implemented. And in the beginning, it looked like this, if you could ever manage to get the camera still at the water level. But it was a bit jarring because there's just this sharp cutoff at the top and the bottom of the water. And it needed some work in order to be, to be there to not notice, because after all, it's only seen for a few frames and it's made to be less noticeable than not having it. So here it is with edge fading. And it just fades from somewhere between the lower and the lowest and the highest wave at any given point. So to explain further what I mean by that, here it is up close. And here's the alpha channel that's used for this fading. So what we need is, we need to trace in to the screen toward the horizon on these waves. And for every step, we need to find, keep saving what is the lowest wave we found yet and what is the highest one. And we also need to keep in mind the horizon of this. And that's because, given this information that we get from the vertex shader, by the way, because that's where we do the displacement, we can then get a fade between them. So where is this pixel, or where is this vertex relative to the top and the bottom of the waveform? And fade out as it gets too close to the bottom or too close to the top, and remain sharp at the horizon, because we don't want to fade out at the horizon. And that's done using the inverse lerp function, which should be in your shader header if it isn't already. It's also sometimes called the remap, and it looks something like that. To better illustrate these top to bottom things, here is what it looks like, the position to the bottom. Like, this is the distance to the bottom of the wave. This is the distance to the top of the wave. This is the distance from the bottom to the back, or the horizon point of the water, just where can you see furthest out back, and from the top to the horizon point. And given this data from the Volumetric shader, inside the fragment shader, you just do a little thing like this, and that gives the exact same results as using inverse lerp or remap. And hopefully all these weeks of despairing work paid off to fruition. Hopefully you don't notice that we use these things everywhere. Hopefully you just notice that there is water or isn't. And hopefully the flat pancake water effect isn't present. So that's what it should be if it works at least. Now, about that spoiler warning, it would be a good time to, if you don't want to get the game spoiled now. And sometimes it's better to delete things. It's better to get rid of them. Maybe because they're too aggressive, or maybe we don't need to render these 10,000 dudes. Maybe we just need a little line in the background. Maybe it's a bit too weird to flush this thing because the situation is already too weird at the end, even though there's a nice flushy effect. Maybe we just don't need that right now. Maybe we just don't need this thing right here either. And when you come across these situations that make you feel good, it's important to just hit the delete key. And for lack of a better expression, it's kill your darlings, and I hate that one. I especially hate it at the beginning because why would I kill my best shit? Like the stuff that makes me feel good and makes everything cool, and I kind of answered my own question there, I think. So it's about deleting what you're too close to because you have no way of judging its unfittingness. Now, I've been very dogmatic up until now, and if you have played the game, and those of you that closed your ears who have not, you'll know that we do turn it up to 11 once or twice, and that this is important. Like, sometimes you might want to give it a little more. So, while this was using VFX as examples, it's more about minimalist approaches and how they're used for minimal work, but generally it's just a good lesson in holding back. No matter the discipline, most of the time you're not the lead violinist, you're not the first violinist, this is called, and it's important to know when you are and when you are not, especially for me. This is stuff that to a lot of people more mature than myself will come across as a big duh, but for me at least, it was something that maybe I would have liked to have known straight out of school with wanting to be the very best there ever was, like no one ever. Maybe. Of course, this turnaround happened because I've had amazing mentorship. Every lesson that I've shared today was not something I came up with. It was something taught by my friends and peers at Playdead who put me in my place. And yeah, thanks to them. Thanks to you that listened, and I hope this talk worked out. Thanks for bearing with me. I wanted to try something else than the talk I did with Mikkel, who led that effort, the more technical talk. If you want to check out some more rendering stuff, anti-aliasing audio, we've got a repo of more knowledge right here. And now, without further ado or segue, we've got 5 minutes, I was told.
We even have some time left, so that's good. So we can have a lot of time for some questions. So if anyone has them, please raise your hand. Okay, start in the front.
Can you put the URL back on so I can photograph it? Yes, thank you.
Any other questions?
This one will answer a bunch of questions too, by the way.
Well, thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. I was wondering, what was the most challenging for you to make, but also the thing you learned the most from?
The most challenging effect?
And the most challenging effect indeed.
Well, when I started, you saw that splash out of the window there? Well, when I started, I had been there like a month, and the directors dragged me over to show a sequence in Uncharted 3 where a whole room is flooded and said, could you make that way better? Still in school, a week on the job, and 4 years later, it was there. So came back and forth between to that effect a bunch of times. I think that one takes the cake as most jarring thing to make, actually.
Anyone else? Okay, I have a question for you. So you talked about your most jarring experience. What is the one that you're most proud of?
Most proud of?
Yes.
Actually, the rain, I think. Yeah, the rain. The rain itself, just because it was through a few iterations, and the one that's in there, it's like we're rendering tens of thousands of raindrops as individual meshes, and it goes really fast, and you don't notice it. So in a way, I'm kind of happy to do something so expensive in a way that you don't even notice. It feels like a good sort of waste of GPU power. That's the one. That or water splashes, when the boy just jumps into the water and it just looks like an Olympic dive. That one just kind of clicked really well. Nobody noticed. I feel like a background dancer sometimes, like just doing my thing in the background so nobody notices I'm doing my thing in the background. It's good.
Any last questions? Yes.
So, given the chance on a future project, would you always turn it down 90%, or would you sometimes just splash it up and do 200%?
I love 200%. It depends on the project. Like, hopefully I'll have the restraint to show restraint when the project shows. It's still not my idea at all. I'm just using I because I make very immature statements, and I don't want to say, you guys are so immature, and when you make an effect that's so good and you have to delete it, it sucks. Like, in a way, yeah.
One final question.
Stuff.
Anyone? Yes.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I binge played the game last weekend, and I really loved it, so thanks for the game as well. Were there any inspirations for this game, like movies or anything that set up the mood for you? Like what kind of things were, like any maybe music?
Well, I can't really share anything about mood because I did sprinkles, so I wouldn't want to talk on somebody's more artistically useful behalf than myself. For me, for that water splash thing, I looked at Arnold Schwarzenegger movies and what was that other one? Poseidon, the one with the boat that goes down. Yeah, not the greatest artistic expressions, but that was what was required for turning it up every notch.
Thanks.
It's time.
All right, thanks.
Yes, thank you.